1 week season.
What is going on, OWS fam, DFS fam? Welcome back to the DFS Lab. I am your host, JM to Win, here with my man, KTM128. Keegan, how's life?
Life's great, man. Just talking about the Bengals and how they're going to be seated.
This weird situation. So we were kind of going through it before we got on air, and then I was like, let's just hop on and we kind of break this down. So the gist of it, we were talking in yesterday's show about like there's really only a few offenses that really stand out: the Bills, the Eagles, the Bengals, and then the question is like, what do the Bengals have to play for? So two sides is basically the Bengals need to win this game because if they lose and the Chargers win, there's this weird scenario where the NFL is going to do a literal coin flip. Now, this is being voted, and we're recording this at 1 p.m. Eastern. The NFL owners started voting on this at noon Eastern. So no new news has come out yet, but basically this is still in the works. Should get voted on, though, to pass. Basically, if the Bengals lose to the Ravens, the Chargers win, the Bengals and Ravens would have a coin flip to see where their playoff game is being played, which is the most bizarre thing possible. Bengals can still get the 2 seed if they win and the Bills lose. Bills can no longer get the 1 seed if this proposal passes, but they can still play the AFC Championship game at a neutral site instead of having to play it in Kansas City if they win this weekend. So still things to play for these teams. The flip side of that is if the Bengals win this week, and this is something that Mike brought up in his NFL Edge write-up, if the Bengals win, Ravens lose, these two teams are almost certainly, or these two teams are playing each other in the playoffs in the first round. Flip side of that, if the Ravens win, Bengals lose, but then the Chargers also win, then again, we have the Ravens and Bengals playing each other in the first round of the playoffs. So one of the things that we're probably going to see, we already have Lamar Jackson trending toward not playing. And one would think that the Ravens are not going to throw their best defense at the Bengals. So if you're the Ravens, you're going to play it almost like a preseason game more than likely, where you're going to be like, rather than throwing like all of your mixed and disguised coverages and blitz packages at the Bengals and letting them get a look at them a week early, you're going to say, let's just throw a vanilla scheme at them and basically like save this in our back pocket for next week. At the same time, if you are the Bengals, if you're Jamar Chase and you're running a route against these cornerbacks, like you're not going to go through all of your releases and all of your setups and whatnot to try to get as open as you can get. Bengals still need to win this game, right? So every reason for the Bengals to still call things normally. And then the third layer here is we do see divisional opponents basically say like, there's nothing this team can throw at us that we haven't seen from them before. These coaching staffs, Harbaugh's been there for 10 plus years. Zach Taylor's been there for 3 years now. So these teams know each other extremely well. It's not like they have a bunch in their back pocket that they're going to suddenly throw out there in the 19th week of the season in the wild card round that these two teams haven't seen. So maybe like we could be at risk of overstating this a little bit is what I mean to say. And like maybe the Ravens just play their normal defense and then try to win this game and just say, look, we're going to be playing our normal defense in the playoffs as well. But just a lot of weird things to think about there. Slight risks on this spot because of all those things. But I think we're in a week with big risks in a lot of other spots, right? The only spot that I see with like no risk, only spots are like Bills and Eagles because they need those wins, especially the Eagles. They need that win to lock up the number 1 seed. And they're playing a Giants team that should be resting starters. But yeah, the more than likely, like 95% chance Bengals run their normal offense, are going all out to win this game. They have every reason to try to win this game. So yeah, that's a full breakdown. Any further thoughts or questions on how all of that shakes out?
Yeah. Just like one thing, sometimes, I mean, it's a very, dice roll type of thought process, but every now and then I do kind of try and think, like emotionally about the players and how the players are going to do like on an emotional basis per week. And Josh Allen and the Bills team specifically, do you think there's any like weight on that team per Monday?
Yeah, so I like that thought. It's something that when I used to do my show with Levitan, he would frequently talk about just from like a betting standpoint, the way bettors look at things like this is a letdown spot or this is a spot where this is obviously a very unique situation. But yeah, this is something that I think that I don't necessarily take into account a ton, and is something that I could loop into my game a little bit more in terms of like, oh, this team had this huge win last week, and now they're playing this bad team, and this is a potential letdown spot, or this is a game that this team will get up for. I would put it like this: if you're the Bills this year, did you ever watch that Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance documentary?
Yeah.
So you remember, and most people who are watching the show probably watched it, like when they lost to the Pistons in the playoffs, I think it was the second year in a row. And then they just like worked so hard that offseason. It was like, we got to get over this hump. And then they came out and just like annihilated the Pistons in the playoffs and won that first championship. That's what the Bills have reminded me of this year when they lost that heartbreaker to Kansas City last year in the playoffs, where it was back and forth. And then Mahomes got the ball back with, I think it was 13 seconds, 19 seconds, whatever it was, drove the whole field, won the game, sent the Bills home. The Bills have been on a mission this offseason. They've been on a mission throughout the season. Early season losses, press conferences after those, the Bills were unfazed. It was just like, every game's a learning experience, whether we win or we lose. We're just seeing what we can learn and move on to the next week. That's been their process all season. So in my mind, this Bills team, so Demar Hamlin, most recent news is that he's like neurological functions back intact. He's talking, he's breathing without a tube, and he actually spoke to the Bills team this morning via Skype or Zoom or whatever. So in my mind, the only thing this is going to do is pull this Bills team closer together. This isn't like a fractured team that is, kind of all over the place and has been on the verge of making the playoffs and maybe they lose focus. This is like a team that has been on this mega mission all off season to come back, get over this hump, win a Super Bowl. And so I see this as, and now they've got the deck stacked against them where it's like they should have been on track to get the number one seed, get the only first round bye, get a home playoff game in the championship. And now all of a sudden, deck stacked against them, they're going to have to play in the first round of the playoffs. Assuming the Chiefs win on Saturday against the Raiders, they're going to have to play in the first round of the playoffs. They won't get a home game of the championship. And I would see this as a team that rather than getting down on themselves, and this is from watching lots of press conferences with coaches and players from this team all season, rather than getting down on themselves, I see this as a team that's going to be like, all right, like us against the world, deck stacked against us. Let's keep grinding. Let's keep going. So yeah, I would think that this is a spot where the Patriots playing the Bills in this situation, the Patriots are at a massive disadvantage is how I would see it. Now, obviously that's from the outside, but part of my edge in DFS is that I watch all of these press conferences and pay attention to the teams on that level. So that's how I see this game. I think it's a super sharp question to ask. And I think that a lot of people who ask that question will probably see it as like, oh, this team's been distracted this week and lack of focus. And so if we can kind of flip that around and say, well, really, this team has had this singular focus all season. And now like they've had this uplift of Demar Hamlin talking to them today. I see this as a spot where I would hate to be the Patriots going in and playing this game against the Bills this week.
Yeah, I mean, I love that mindset. That's awesome. With all that being said, I think we should maybe have like a Bills-based roster today. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm down with that. I'd love to let's do a Bills roster today. We did a Bengals, and these are, again, the three quarterbacks I really like are Burrow and Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. Let's do a Bills roster today, and let's tomorrow aim to start with Jalen Hurts, because I think that these are quarterbacks who a lot of people will kind of look in the 5K range this week and be like, hey, where can I save salary, do something a little bit different? And I think that these guys all have a shot at smashing this week. So if we are, let me pull up your screen. If we are going with a Josh Allen roster, what we've typically seen is when Josh Allen hits, Stefon Diggs hits. But also I was looking the other day at Gabe Davis as like, who are the guys who could randomly have a huge game? Patriots play a lot of man coverage, allow a deep average depth of target. So he's another guy that we consider throwing in here. How are you wanting to? And then there's obviously like you can throw in Dawson Knox instead to just kind of approach things that way. How do you want to put this roster together?
I think every week I mention like a player bias, and one of the strongest player biases I have this entire year is over Gabe Davis and Dawson Knox in a negative manner, and I think I can try and get rid of that today at least.
Ooh, I like it. Which one are we throwing in here?
Let's do Knox. I've picked Knox probably like 7 weeks this year, and I maybe hit once with him. So yeah, let's do it. Let's check his game log real quick and see what we got.
Yeah, and he's been on a hot streak recently. He's very touchdown dependent in his scoring. And as we look through these game logs, we see 3 games in a row with a touchdown, 3 solid DFS scores in a row. he had a big season last year, and he had, I think it was 11 touchdowns that he had last season. We need a fact checker on this show, but I think it was 10 touchdowns, 11 touchdowns that he had last season. And so his stock in fantasy circles was high coming into the season. And I was underweight on him in best ball just because it was like, well, that touchdown production is tough to repeat across an entire season. But in the scope of like 1 week, and when we know that touchdowns are pretty important for our upside in fantasy, I like playing a guy like Dawson Knox with my quarterback and Josh Allen, because what's great is a lot of people are going to get the tight end position wrong anyway. So if we get it wrong, but Josh Allen has a big game, we're not that far behind people. And then if we get it right, like if Josh Allen's touchdowns come through Dawson Knox, we're getting a stack that most people won't have. So it's like very few drawbacks to this type of build and a lot of positives to this type of build, throwing Dawson Knox into here. And honestly, because Dawson Knox is so touchdown dependent, we could still throw in another guy if we wanted to,
Right.
Or we could just say, like, let's bet on Josh Allen getting a lot of work with his legs, and instead of this work coming through the air.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I had the same thought as well. Why don't we add one more guy in here? And I love Stef Diggs this week. He really hasn't been showing too much, I'm pretty sure. Let's see.
Yeah, 4.6 last week,
Yeah.
10.7, 6.7. Last time he had a game of 27 points was way back in week 10. Last time he topped 30 was all the way back in week 6, which is absolutely nuts. In fact, he's only topped 30 points twice this year, which I think would surprise most people. But in this spot, if we're going to throw in, I'll say it like this, if we're going to throw in Stefon Diggs, we're probably still going to try to get Jefferson or Chase or A.J. Brown or one of these other high-priced guys, right? So then if Diggs goes for 30, one of these other guys goes for 30, we're in really good shape on a roster like this.
Perfect. And then obviously I have like my ways kind of set in stone at this point. Like if I get two expensive guys, I already have the tight end placed. Usually the next spot that I go for is that defense. Is there any other way to go about this other than that?
Yeah, so I would want to ask the question of, do we want to do a bring back on this roster? And the answer doesn't have to be yes, right? Because we know how good the Bills secondary is, and we know this is going to be a tough spot for New England. We know that the Bills don't need New England to be scoring points in order for them to be aggressive. But that's still a question that I would want to ask here is, do I want to bring back, especially when we're talking about, hey, we've got these expensive guys, because all the Patriots wideouts are cheap. So Jacoby Myers is obviously the highest probability guy. And in fact, if you pull up his game logs, yeah, he's been solid of late. And then he had some games where he was playing limited snaps, some games where he was banged up. But Jacoby Myers becomes interesting because he's going to get a lot of volume if the Bills are scoring a lot of points and the Patriots are chasing points. But we're not saving that much in salary here. And then you've got the Tyquan Thorntons or the DeVante Parkers if he comes back this week. Those types of guys Kendrick Bournes, who can pop up for a big game in the 3K price range, which if they only get you 6 or 7 points, it doesn't kill you. And then if they get you 15 to 20, you're sitting really pretty. So yeah, I'd be fine going with a bring back or not with a bring back. Yeah, you see that like Kendrick Bourne can pop for one of these games.
Yeah.
He doesn't have horrible games when he misses. But again, it's not something we have to do here, but it is something we could think about in terms of, hey, let's save some salary here and go with one of these guys.
So like Nelson Aguilar, Tyquan Thornton, Kendrick Bourne, are any of these three like standing out to you when it comes to like a more stout secondary?
So no, not necessarily. And what's most frustrating here is the Patriots rotate their wide receivers based on game plan, and we don't know what that game plan is. So what we've seen this season is when DeVante Parker is healthy, he's basically played 80 to 100% of the snaps. So it's like Parker and Jacoby Myers are the staples. But we've seen Parker healthy little enough this year that people don't necessarily realize that, right? So if Parker ends up coming back, limited participant in practice this week, right? We still don't know if he's going to come back from this concussion yet. But if he comes back, he's going to be on the field basically the whole time, right? And so he's the kind of guy who I would be most drawn toward. If he doesn't come back, then you have this rotation where Aguilar has been at the bottom the last 2 weeks. But before that, if you pull up Aguilar's game logs real quickly, we'll see that he's like completely bombed out the last couple of weeks, 0 points each the last 2 weeks, 1.3 points the week before that, but then 10 targets the week before that. In fact, 6 targets the week where he had 1.3 points. So like he's had this really random yo-yo type season. Right now, he's at the bottom of the totem pole, but that doesn't mean he necessarily stays there. But all these guys like Thornton, Aguilar, and Kendrick Bourne, they try to get the ball in their hands in different ways and kind of get them in space to kind of hit some big plays. So yeah, nobody stands out over the others if Parker is out. If Parker's in, then Parker's the guy I would want if I'm saving salary down here.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, during this show that he is in, let's play Parker.
All right, I really do like that because we save some salary and then we can go to defense and get a clearer sense of what other salary we have. And I think that this is an important function for roster construction too, in terms of when we're going for high-priced guys, how we think about the low-priced guys. And I think that we can get too boxed into being like thinking floor and ceiling or thinking projectable upside. But a lot of times tournament winning rosters are the ones that get this 3K guy who has a low floor, but goes for his 15 to 20 point game. And there's plenty of times where we see tournament winning rosters, especially in contests like under 1,500 entries, under 2,000 entries, tournament winning rosters where the 3K guy doesn't hit. He maybe only gets 6 or 7 points, but he opens up that salary to fit in a roster that other people can't fit in. So Parker's the perfect kind of guy to play down here where he has a real role. People won't be playing him. He has a high ceiling when he hits. And if he misses, he can still get you 5, 6, 7 points and not totally kill your roster at his price tag.
Awesome. So I'm going to go down to defense here. And you said yesterday that there are mainly 3 defenses at the high price that stand out to you, and it's the top 3: Niners, Eagles, Cowboys. And I mean, we've looked at their game logs multiple times, and basically all 3 of those defenses like rarely score under 6 points. I mean, they're not going to get you in the negative, that's for sure. So those are all fine. And then down here, you had mentioned Jets and Texans. Is there anybody else in the lower range that you are interested in?
Not that that's really stood out to me yet. The Vikings are going to be popular this week. We talked yesterday about Nathan Peterman's career history: 13 interceptions on 141 pass attempts, 3 touchdown passes. So the Vikings are going to be popular because they're playing Nathan Peterman. It's a weird one, right? The Vikings are also not that good. And yet we've seen the Browns put up 30 DraftKings points against the Texans when who was starting for the Texans that week? Not Davis Mills, but whoever the other guy was. And we've seen Miami, who also hasn't had a good defense special team season, put up a big score against the Texans in that scenario. We've seen some situations like that where mediocre defenses put up monster scores just because the opposing quarterback is just giving the ball away, right? So I do want to keep in mind, like, if the Vikings are super popular, we haven't looked at ownership projections yet, but if the Vikings are super popular and they're playing against Nathan Peterman, that does kind of become a key decision point, right? Because maybe the Vikings score 15 to 20 points at 2,900, and it's like, well, why didn't we just ride the chalk there? So I would think about on a roster, I would also be thinking about how differentiated is the rest of my roster, and is this a spot where I want to just ride with the Vikings? And that's not something that there's no like yes or no answer on this roster yet, but that's just a thought that I would want to have in my mind this week, especially if the Vikings come in with like 20, 25% ownership projections of, do I want to end up on this team? Like, do I want to just ride with the chalk on this team? I'm actually going to look up ownership projections real quickly to see what we're showing right now on that defense. But yeah, any thoughts on that for this roster for defense at this point on this build?
Yeah, actually, it's a thought that I've like kind of been having for a while. With like the ownership projections, and especially with what happened last week. I mean, there were really 3 main defenses that everybody was choosing: the Niners, Patriots, and then one more. I forgot what it was. Eagles. All 3 of them did not hit. Like, I mean, they got 2 points, 3 points, and 4 points, or something close to that. And they were all projected very high. And then the people that did hit were the Saints, which were the lowest price defense. So it's like, when does the risk like reward ratio come into play when you want to choose? Like, you're looking at these lower defenses and you're like, how bad can these defenses hurt me? And like, what can they allow me to get at like a higher price position?
Yeah. And it's one of these things where there's not like a linear path to the thinking on these things. It's almost like you have all these floating pieces and you're just kind of trying to see what the balance is of all of them. So the Saints was another situation last week where they were playing a bad quarter. They're not a defense that generates a ton of turnovers, and yet they were playing not even a bad quarterback. They were playing Gardner Minshew, And, Gardner Minshew isn't even that careless with the football, but they just ended up having this big game, got a lot of sacks and forced some turnovers. And yeah, it's what I always want to think about is like, how likely is the big game? So like the 49ers were pretty likely to have a big game last week, but then bombed. But the Patriots were also pretty likely to have a big game and hit. And to pull up the Patriots game log real quickly, I forget what they had last weekend, but they had yet another defense special teams touchdown. So they put up 12 points at 2,600. Okay. And so how much of an edge do you gain? If you have like three defenses, the Eagles were expensive last week, but the 49ers and Patriots were cheap. They're probably not all going to miss if they're all playing like backup quarterbacks or they're all in really good spots or all underpriced. And so in that type of situation, I'm less likely to go off the board because you don't just have to be one of those defenses. Like if the 49ers bomb, great, you pass them, but you still need the other defenses to fail as well. If the chalk defense is a little bit more thin than normal, that's the type of spot where I want to be like, oh, let me move to a different direction. Or if it's like heavily concentrated. The week the Cowboys played the Texans and they were 3,400 and they were like 40% owned, I ended up going down to the Panthers against, I think it was Panthers against the Seahawks. But I went down to the Panthers at like 2,100 or 2,200. Yeah, it was Panthers against the Seahawks. And it was like there was like 1 point that was kind of the whole slate was riding on it, right? And it was the Cowboys defense. So it was like, well, if the Cowboys just don't blow up, even if they get 6, 7, 8 points at 3,400, I'm in good shape. But if the ownership's kind of spread out, then I'm less likely to want to try to attack that because it's like all of and if I really like the defenses, all of them would have to fail. Right now, the Vikings are showing only 10% ownership, but we're also on a roster. Josh Allen's projected to be currently the second highest owned quarterback. Stefon Diggs currently projected to be the second highest owned wide receiver. So our differentiators right now are Dawson Knox and DeVante Parker. Both will be low owned, but their chances of putting up like a separator score are pretty low. Like if Dawson Knox hits, he probably gets like 16 to 18 points, which is awesome for us, but doesn't like win us a tournament. If Parker hits, he posts a separator score because he's only 3,700 and can score 20 plus, but his chances of doing that are somewhat low. So I would still want to be looking for on this roster, like where am I separating from the field? That doesn't have to be a defense, right? We could still play the Vikings at defense. But our next thoughts on this roster need to start trending toward like, all right, and what do we do that like leapfrogs everybody? If Josh Allen and Diggs hit and we're just riding with everybody right here, where do we leapfrog people from there?
Okay, awesome. I love the way you answered that question. And I'm kind of looking at the Jets this week. I look at the Jets every week because I just love the Jets defense. I forgot there's like 2 people that are injured on there that are like really main pieces on that defense, if you know who I'm talking about.
No, off the top of my head, I don't. But I do know they're going to be probably playing Skylar Thompson this week for Miami, who's been like sub-replacement level at quarterback when he's been playing. So, I don't have major concerns about the Jets' defense in this spot. They've had a tough run of games. But yeah, we can throw the Jets defense in here. And then again, we're also getting a sense of our salary at this point where we can always move up to the Vikings if we see that like, okay, we're like doing enough different in other spots so we can just ride with the chalk on the Vikings, or we can stay with the Jets if that's the way that we want to go deeper into this roster.
Okay, yeah. I mean, we can stay with the Vikings and then kind of pivot down if
and then see, we know that we have that salary available. We can free up 300 extra in salary if we need to.
Awesome. Okay, and then we don't have a running back yet, so I'm totally cool with going to the running back position here.
So right now it looks like, since we're kind of talking about like how do we differentiate a little bit, Christian McCaffrey is going to be the chalk, unsurprisingly. Dalvin Cook right behind him, Kenneth Walker right behind him, Najee Harris, Tyler Allgeier. The guys who can go for a big game and are drawing low ownership or sub 10% ownership, or the first one is Miles Sanders. He's at 10.7% ownership, but Miles Sanders can go for a big game and be a separator. And that's about it. It gets really like running back super thin this week. So what we would want to be looking to do then is either and we don't want to like get ourselves boxed in by ownership, but since we're on Friday, ownership projections are available. We can kind of start looping that into our thinking a little bit. And we can do this without ownership projections too, right? Of just thinking like, hey, what will people not be doing? What will people not have? But at this point, I would want to think either about like a salary structure that's totally different from what people would have, which would be like a Khalil Herbert type back, where it's like, hey, he could bust off some long runs and get you 20 points in the last game of the season. The kind of guy that people won't be thinking of, but if we look back at the end of the day, we're like, oh yeah, this guy had a big game. That's not surprising. He's only 4,600. So that shifts up our salary a ton. So I like doing something like that, or going like Miles Sanders and another running back that we like, and then trying to find a different place where we can pull a trigger on something that's just like totally different.
Okay, yeah. I don't know. Like you said, running back's really thin this week. I'm totally fine. Did we go Miles Sanders last week or yesterday, or did we?
I don't know. I did another roster building show yesterday, so I don't remember for sure, but I think we might have had him in and then pivoted off. But and ended up with Najee Harris and like Tyler Allgeier or something like that.
We saved some salary somewhere else, so I'm totally fine with going Miles Sanders on this one.
And now we got Miles Sanders. We don't have Jalen Hurts. We have Josh Allen, who's Jalen Hurts going to be the other highest owned quarterback, and so we get some leverage off of Jalen Hurts on this one. Maybe we did have Miles Sanders, because I remember saying that yesterday, but we'll make sure that we go a different direction. And then even like going two of these 6K running backs would be kind of a different salary structure. So if we really liked Cam Akers or Kenneth Walker or Najee Harris, we could go with one of those guys. That's right. We ended up having the salary to get up to Kenneth Walker yesterday.
Yep.
So we could go one of those guys, or again, we could just go like really cheap at our second running back and just know that we're doing something really different than the field is going to be doing here.
So it might have been you that said it, but the Rams are really focusing on running the ball and not letting Baker pass as much. Do you remember saying that, or did I hear that?
Yeah, and as long as they can keep games close. I mean, Baker hasn't topped – I don't think he's topped 28 pass attempts in a game. And so as long as they can keep games close – they're going to want to run the ball. Seattle has a really bad run defense. Seattle has also been really run-centric lately. They've got some issues on their offensive line. They've got some Tyler Lockett's dealing with the finger issue, with the leg issue. So this is the type of spot where you could see them – where you could see the Seahawks leaning on the run, which could make it easier for the Rams to lean on the run because the game could stay close enough that they can do that. So, I like Cam Akers this week. Not a huge pass catching role, but he's looked explosive. He's going to get, if the Rams have their way, he's going to get 20 touches. And again, this is just like, not a lot of people will have this type of build where it's like Miles Sanders and Cam Akers priced right next to each other.
Awesome. And now we're at the wide receiver position, last one. And what are
we're in an interesting spot, right? Because if we did go with like a Corey Davis or something, we'd have 7,300 in the flex. Or we could go two sort of mid-tier guys here and do something that's find guys that we really like a Drake London and somebody else. Like there's a lot of different ways that we could go on this roster from this point forward. And the main thing that I would be looking at here is like I would want one more thing that could really separate this roster, one more thing that could really vault it to the top. Because if Allen and Diggs combine for 60 points, that's awesome. But we're still we're not really in great shape to beat 8,000 other rosters or 5,000 other rosters, just because we're going to be clumped up with a lot of other people who also have Allen and Diggs. Some of them will have Miles Sanders. Some of them will have Cam Akers. Again, if DeVante Parker hits, that's a bonus. That would separate us majorly, but we can't bank on that on a roster like this. So I always want to bake in things that I can kind of bank on these guys having a high probability of hitting and then separating in that way.
So, yeah, I totally agree. In this position, what I would do, if I'm not talking to you about this or on the show at all, if I was just sitting down creating rosters, what I would usually do is I would go to the quarterbacks and, like you said, look for the top three that week and try to correlate that with I kind of bring it with what you've told me as well of can they kind of score 25, 30 points and they're still a decent salary. So I look at that as just a little.
Yeah, I like that idea. And it's a way of saying I'm not necessarily betting against this other quarterback. It's recognizing that Josh Allen hitting doesn't mean that Burrow and Hurts miss, right? It's Josh Allen can hit and these other guys can also hit. And so then I can benefit from these other guys also hitting. So yeah, I like that approach. I don't know who we're seeing that could kind of fit in that bucket. Yeah, looking at ownership, it's Hurts at 13.5%, Allen at 12.4%, Burrow at 9.4%. Everyone else is under 6% owned. So it seems like people are seeing the slate the same way of like these three quarterbacks as a tier above everybody else.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we could go double tight end. I think we did that yesterday with Okwuegbunam. And we could go double tight end here, though, with like Dallas Goedert and correlate him with Jalen Hurts, right? There's something that people won't be doing. And Goddard has the same scoring range as the other wide receivers priced around him. Or we could go with like a Tyler Boyd on the Bengals, something like that. Any thoughts on how we can maybe pull that trigger?
Yeah, I mean, my main thought was I wanted Jamar Chase on here because you said we really wanted like two expensive receivers, and yesterday we played T. Higgins, and I really want to throw Jamar Chase in there.
Throw Jamar Chase on. We're not going to have the salary, but we can rework some things because I don't think that we're married. So two things. One, Okwuegbunam is only 2,800. If we wanted to, like, that can be kind of our cheat code in the flex. We can go from the Vikings down to the Jets, and that saves us another 300. And we're not married to Cam Akers, right? We can move off Cam Akers and go to Najee Harris. It's a very similar play, and all of a sudden that all fits.
So we can get rid of Cam Akers.
And that's pretty dope because we've got Steph Diggs and Jamar Chase. Okay, so we don't have enough for wait, no, 2,900. I was thinking he was 2,800. So yeah, below, we kind of get into a different tier of running back when we get down below Najee. But we could go Tyler Allgeier. Pull up Tyler Allgeier's game logs and look specifically at his carries. So we see this 17, 18, 20 carries his last 3 games. He had 4 catches in one of these games. They're playing this Bucs defense that usually has a good run defense, but Vita Vea, who's really the anchor of this run defense, he hasn't practiced yet this week. And again, this game means nothing to the Bucs. So it seems highly likely that they keep Vita Vea out, get him healthy for the playoffs, which actually makes this a really good run game matchup. Buccaneers have been attackable on the ground when Vita Vea has been out. And look at these scores from Allgeier, right? Those are solid scores at 5,600. So it's a little bit more expensive than I'd like. Like I'd love him 51, 5,200. But for the purposes of this roster, he fits. And if we put him in, we actually have the salary to go back up to the Vikings, which I would kind of prefer because then we're not predicting that one defense is going to do better than the other. We're just saying what gives us our clearest path at first place. It's siding with the chalk on the Vikings because we're doing enough different on this roster in other spots. And now we've got something where it's like there's a lot of Josh Allen and Stefon Diggs rosters, but none of them are going to have Jamar Chase. So now if Chase also goes for 30, you got these, we move up with these Diggs and Allen rosters, and then we like leapfrog them when we get to Jamar Chase. And then if DeVante Parker hits, if Dawson Knox hits, these guys are just like bonuses that bump us up further, but we're not relying on those guys as much because we've got Jamar Chase on this roster. Miles Sanders can go for 30 points. Allgeier can go for 25. I think it's a really sharp roster. And what I like about it too is it came together. This is why I like building a lot of rosters, right? It's like you would never think of this roster just like off the top of your head. But when you kind of push the pieces around a roster like this and you ask the right strategy questions, a roster like this can come together. Any final thoughts on this before we get out of here?
No, I'm just happy that we were able to fit in like 3 quite expensive.
Yeah. And it's like, obviously Okwuegbunam, we're banking on it like a 2,900 tight end having a 15-point game or something, right? But like,
probably possible.
He's not going to kill us. And DeVante Parker can go for 20 and he's not going to kill us. It's not like we took bad value here. We tell really good comprehensive stories. We've got 3 Bills and a Patriots bring back. We're riding with the chalk on the Vikings. Miles Sanders will be somewhat popular, but not super popular. A lot of upside. Same thing with Allgeier. Just a really nice roster here. Tomorrow we'll try to build. We'll keep the people happy. We've got a Burrow build, a Josh Allen build. We'll get a Hurts build in tomorrow. But I like the way this one came together. Definitely gives us a shot at first place. With that, we will get out of here. We will see you on OWS throughout the weekend. We will see you back here on Saturday when we'll hopefully have even more information on this strange slate And we will see you at the top of the leaderboards on Sunday.